Thank you for being on our panel. Yeah, good to see you. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. You,
Excited to be here.
I know. Y'all got a big contingent here.
I only have two.
Well, I do. Thank you, Crystal. Yeah. You gave it. Somebody had it for me at the board meeting this morning. What's that? Well, I've got my part. That's all I need. I just got to introduce Carly. Yep, and then come up with it out now. So, yeah, so there we go. Yes, I do need the closing. Thank you for that. Crystal, you're always taking care of me.
Very one of the sessions explores allocation, and they are in tax. So here we are.
All right, Carly, you ready to roll?
It's 1:30. Ready to roll?
All right.
You guys ready?
Everybody ready? All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending our North Carolina Transportation Summit. I believe maybe we skipped a year in COVID, but I believe this is like the 6th year. So it's been very successful, and thanks in part to all of y'all who come together as transportation professionals and elected officials who are interested in transportation. We've got a great panel this afternoon, and it's one that I'm very excited about. I've had a long tenure on the Board of Transportation, and during my tenure, the concept of P3s, was a very new concept. And I think in North Carolina, we certainly have been a leader in that, but we've also got experts from across the country to also talk to us about what's happening in other areas and other states. In North Carolina, we definitely need this. You heard If you were here this morning, you heard the governor say we are the fastest, or one of the three fastest growing states in the country. We're number three. We're the number one state for business. And so we've got a lot of industries that are looking to come here, and we got a lot of people moving here. And so we need to deliver projects faster and with a better budgetary constraint. And we also need to involve our partners in making sure that we can deliver them efficiently and bring all the benefits of the industry experience to the projects that we're doing. So we're really lucky to have a great moderator here today. Carly Swanson is NCDOT's Director of Innovative Delivery, and she's had a lot of experience in P3. She's worked with them across the state, but she's also directly involved in the Turnpike Authority, and they are some of our leading P3 folks. And so if you would, please give Carly a warm welcome, and looking forward to a great discussion.
Thank you, Mike, for kicking off our panel, and thank you all for attending our session this afternoon. First, I just kind of want to briefly walk through North Carolina and the outlook on P3s in our state. Like every state in the nation, North Carolina has experienced a dramatic increase in infrastructure cost, and I know other states are not alone. Our traditional funding estimates simply don't go as far as they used to. With more people moving to North Carolina every day, NCDOT, with many of the transportation planning organizations we work with across the state, are exploring new ways and new tools to help us meet growing demands. And one of those tools includes public-private partnerships, or P3s. P3s leverage the private sector's expertise to design, build, finance, operate, and maintain public infrastructure. These are long-term performance-based contracts that involve private equity and long-term debt obligations. And when done right, P3s can be powerful tools accelerating project delivery and improving outcomes. North Carolina currently has one operational P3, that's the I-77 North Express Lanes in the Charlotte region, which opened in 2019. As the state's first express lanes and P3 project, it provided valuable lessons learned that continue to shape the department's approach today. But the fact still does remain that drivers now have an additional choice in the Charlotte region to reach their destination and a more reliable travel time. And because of the P3 model, we were able to deliver this project years earlier than traditional funding would have allowed. And as of this year, NCDOT did receive its first revenue payment. Now, 6 years later, we're seeing a shift, and now there's growing interest in the local, state, and federal levels when it comes to P3s. Just over 2 weeks ago, NCDOT released an RFQ for our second P3, the I-77 South Express Lanes project. And for those of you who were at our industry forum yesterday, thank you for your interest in the project and participation. This follows years of local engagement and close coordination with the Regional Planning Organization, or CRTPO, and thank you to the CRTPO staff and board members that are here today with us as well. Additionally, it's worth noting that projects now over $750 million anticipated to use federal funding now require an evaluation of public-private partnerships as a delivery method. Additionally, at the state level, the number of P3 slots just increased from 3 to 6 this legislative session in North Carolina. At the end of the day, we owe it to the people of North Carolina to explore every available tool, whether it's P3s or not, to help us deliver safe, efficient, and forward-thinking transportation solutions. And that includes giving planning organizations and local leaders a full understanding of their options when making decisions that impact their communities. And in today's conversation, you'll hear from transportation leaders across the Southeast who are driving real results in their states. And my goal for you today, as you walk away from this session, is to leave with a clear understanding of DOT's approach to risk in the P3 landscape and how these partnerships can support better infrastructure outcomes. To help us with that, I'm joined by a panel of experts, including Commissioner Stephen Britch from the Virginia Department of Transportation, Tim Matthews, Assistant P3 Division Director from the Georgia Department of Transportation, Paige Heintzman, Director of P3 Delivery from Tennessee Department of Transportation, and Dr. Sean Wilson, who is Senior Vice President at WSP and the former Secretary of the Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development. Thank you all for being here today. Each panelist will begin by sharing some background on their state's experience with P3s, along with key insights from their projects and perspective. After the introductions, we'll move into the moderated discussion, and we encourage your participation as well. If you have questions during this session, please hold them for the designated Q&A portion towards the end of our panel. Now, let's welcome our first panelist, Commissioner Stephen Britch.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I just want to give a quick shout out to North Carolina. I think this is an excellent conference. We put on one every year, but I hate to say this, luckily there's not many people from Virginia in here, but you guys really know how to put on a great transportation conference. I love the format. We might steal some of these ideas coming across the border. But when Carly asked me to participate in this, I was really excited to be able to talk about the balancing act for P3s, because it is just that. So let me give you a quick overview of the Virginia's P3 program. And I'm happy to say that it turns 30 years old this year. So we have quite a bit of history with it. We've got some bumps, bruises, scrapes, some stitches out of it as well. So it is, if you're doing your second, we're further along, but we are here to share what we have learned so that the Southeast states don't make the same mistakes that we did. But it has helped us forge a better program and one with a lot of transparency. As I said, it was enacted in 1995 as a framework to be able to deliver very large-scale construction program and projects in Virginia. It encourages faster improvements that Virginia alone, through the public sector, could not do at a time of an economic crisis. I will say that our P3 legislation is a procurement statute and vehicle. It does not obviate the need to be able to meet other state and federal regulations. It's just not carte blanche that we can go through a greenfield and develop a project in itself without NEPA or our state environmental review process. Our P3 legislation also does not require the entity to bring public financing or private financing to the table. In other words, we can do this as an O&M project. We can do it as a design build project. We can do it as a design build finance project. So there's a host of categories that we can use through this method. So why is VDOT focused, or Virginia focused on the P3 model? Simple terms, we were going through a funding shortfall, and we knew that the public sector financing would not be able to deliver the projects and the infrastructure that was needed to be able to keep Virginia competitive. You know, Mike talked about North Carolina being the best state to do business, CNBC. Virginia was there last year. So, you know, this is where infrastructure really takes off and builds that competitive basis in the economic forum that we need to be competitive in our marketplace. Second is really risk sharing. How do we balance the risk? And I know we're going to have a little bit more of a conversation on risk sharing in this, but it's truly how do we balance the risk between the delivery of the model and the revenue that could be generated by the private sector to be able to support their investment. It's also ability to be able to take the ingenuity that the private sector can build or bring and build the infrastructure that we can. When we were thinking about design, build, or the design build model, we can continue to build ingenuity into that, but what comes out when there's a revenue or a concessionaire on the other side, we get very creative and we bring to the table some of those alternative technical concepts. And this is just wanted to highlight a couple of the more recent transactions that Virginia has done. And you can see through the delivery method that we do have, most of them have been design, build, finance, and operate and maintain. But we do have a number of design build projects that we have used this model. In fact, you'll see the Hampton Roads or HRBT expansion, which is a $4 billion project that is the largest construction project that's ongoing in the Commonwealth today. So 30 years of experience. This is just a highlight of all of the transactions that we have brought to the table throughout the Commonwealth. Many of those were, some of our under construction today, many of those have been completed. And I'll talk about what we have ongoing up in the Northern Virginia area. But out of this picture, $20 billion of value, construction value of the projects that have been brought to Virginia that would not have been able to be advanced had we done it by public financing alone. Here are some of the types of projects that we have, from managed lanes to tunnels to toll roads. We have 5 independent operators for our toll facilities and managed lanes across the Commonwealth. This is where I like to brag a little bit. I think we have the largest managed lanes program in the country, 94 miles of lanes today. We're adding another 2.5 miles, very expensive 2.5 miles, valued at $650 million, where we're going to pump up right up against the American Legion Bridge on the border of Maryland. So 94 miles of express lanes. I hope to add to those further south out on 95, hopefully down to Richmond at some point in time. But you can see this. Northern Virginia, 94 miles. Hampton Roads, we have 2 projects right now that are concession deals, Midtown Downtown project, but also our largest project, the HRBT expansion. And uniquely with some of these P3s, we've been able to put in a toll relief program at the Hampton Road or at the Midtown Downtown project that focuses on low-income individuals between 2 localities to be able to help low-income individuals use that facility more often. We are water-bound in Tidewater, so the detour route is quite long and quite time-consuming. So getting to the risk aspect of this, it truly is a balancing act. If you've done one P3, you have done one P3. They're individually different, and each project brings risks, different risks in itself. When we got together to be able to brief for this, we identified, or Virginia identified, 3 of its top risks to any project. It's really demand and the revenue risk to the concessionaire. Can that concessionaire generate a return on its investment sufficient enough to be able to invest in that facility for us? Construction risk, that's true of any project that we have. And then the political risk. Do we have the backing to be able to move forward? And then the long-term political risk when we have a 50 to 60-year concession. It really boils down to optimizing that risk management and the allocation between the public sector and the private sector. And it's really that open line of communication that you have during your P3 procurement to allow for open and very frank and honest conversations between the concessionaire, the contractor, and the public owner to be able to make sure that you're allocating the risk appropriately and understand that if you don't allocate that risk appropriately monetarily, what is that going to cost? And then finally, I'd say that one of the things that Virginia's brought to the table, and this came through some of our bumps and bruises on a small project called 460, where we terminated a contract and paid the concessionaire quite a bit of sum of money, and without the first bulldozer being pushed. We changed our legislation to be able to build transparency, and the one thing that we have done is added a public sector analysis to our evaluation, meaning that can the state deliver that same project using similar types of resources faster and less expensive than what we could do if we did it through a concession model. This is something that I think Morteza has brought to the table for the value for money analysis. So maybe he stole that from us and put it out there for this. But the public sector analysis is a very important part of any transaction that we do in Virginia. And then finally, I want to wrap up with just some of the risk allocations that we used on the project that I said that we're going to go forward this fall and bring to service commencement on 495 next project. This was directly out of our term sheet when we negotiated it, but you can see the risks that we continue to have through the public sector, the risk retained by the private sector in this case, and then the shared risks that we feel that both sides can contribute to should there be an issue. For example, the excess revenue sharing. If there's a true upside that goes beyond their financial model, then there's a revenue sharing component. The right-of-way acquisition, we think that we have that nailed down, but if there's more right-of-way that's going to be necessary, then there's a risk sharing appropriate to that where the state will come in and pay for additional right-of-way within some limits. But then we also, unique to us is that we have a very high usage of HOVs. And we want to make sure that if HOV usage goes above what we have negotiated out, then the state will compensate the concessionaire for that amount of usage. So I know that we've got a Q&A coming up, so I'm sure we'll be talking more about risk shortly. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Birch. That was a great overview of Virginia. Next, I'd like to introduce Tim Matthews, the Assistant P3 Division Director from the Georgia Department of Transportation.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you and to bring Georgia DOT's perspective on P3 and what we're doing in the state of Georgia. Lots going on, quite frankly. But it all started back, forgive me, I have to make sure I'm got the right slide and talking about the right slide because I don't have it in front of me. But we started back in '03 with our first initiative of legislation passed to allow unsolicited proposals for public-private initiatives is what we called it back then. Over time, we did receive unsolicited proposals, 4 in fact, and those 4 were State Route 400, Northwest Corridor, 285 West express lanes, and then also a 316 corridor. So early on, we got quite a bit of interest for what we were hoping to solve problems from a congestion perspective. However, several years after that, the state legislature basically said we don't want unsolicited proposals anymore because there was some conflicting desires through that solicitation, and we weren't able to do some of the things that we wanted to do if we were to go forward with that proposal. So we changed and shifted to solicited proposals, and ultimately shifted to what we call public-private partnership, which is current industry nomenclature. So we eventually got to PPPs, but started out as PPIs, and ultimately getting our first solicited proposal on the Northwest Corridor, which we ultimately built on a design-build finance model, and it's open to traffic today. But all that effort led to recognizing that we need more funding to solve our congestion problems in the metro region, and in doing so, the state legislature said, let's fund it ourselves. So they passed the Transportation Investment Act, which infused about $1 billion extra per year on our program, which really built us the ability to bring more solutions to solve our problems. And that led to the Major Mobility Investment Program. And here is that program here. It's made up of various types of projects, from interchanges to interstate widenings, design-build projects, design-build finance projects, and design-build finance operate and maintain projects. So like the commissioner said a minute ago, not every project warrants a P3 type of deal, but there's other mechanisms that we use in our toolbox to deliver these projects as well. So I won't go over every one here, but what you will recognize is a lot of success in this program over the last 10 years. Most everything is under construction or open to traffic or in procurement, apart from a couple of projects. So very successful program over the past 10 years. Where are our P3 deals? We have quite a few of them. You can see here we have about 10 of them. Some people call us ambitious. Some people may call us crazy. But we have been successful in P3 deals. Now, whether that's a DBF project or a DBF availability project or DBFOM, and that success most recently was our State Route 400 project. Yes, they are all mostly in the metro area, which is where our highly congested corridors are, and we believe the right places to use this tool in our toolbox for P3 delivery. So we do have one down near Savannah. It was a design-build finance project, new interchange and widening on 16 and 95, so that one's almost complete from a construction perspective as well. So that's where we got our projects located. We do have an express lane network already open and operating. Unfortunately, they're not connected yet, but we're on our way to get there, which is what came out of the Major Mobility Investment Program with the express lanes. We have an existing operating reversible system on Northwest Corridor. Actually, first express lane was a conversion to hot lanes on I-85. It was a pilot program from FHWA. We quickly went to the I-75 reversible system on the south side of Atlanta with I-75 Metro South. Then we built Northwest Corridor up 75, 575, which is open and operating. And then we extended the hot lanes up 85. So those projects are open and operating using either a design build finance or just a design build type of delivery. Recognizing we needed to adapt to where we're at in the market today when it comes to risk, when it comes to cost of these projects, we went from delivering State Route 400 as an AP deal, got down that delivery path, all ready to award the project, and recognized that we really couldn't afford that deal at the time. So we started over and said, what are the other tools in the toolbox? Listened to the industry, found out what the best practices were and the best approach, and ultimately landed on DBFOM concession project for State Route 400, and decided to use that model on 285 as well. So you could see there, which ultimately, once 400 and 285 gets built, really brings those existing infrastructure connected system of express lanes in the metro region. And we also just recently added, at the governor's request, turning I-75 South Metro Express into a bidirectional system. So we're going to build the other direction. A lot of people get upset when they go down there and they can't get in, going in the congestion direction. Here, obviously, this is our toolbox. There's lots of different tools. We have legislation now that really expands our ability to use almost all tools in that toolbox. Most recently, with alternative contracting methods, CMGC, CDA, PDAs, that was our most recent over the past couple of years. So we really value this toolbox and really find the right tool to make sure we deliver the best value to the state when it comes to these projects. Most importantly, managing the risk profile and bringing that right partner to partner with us to deliver the project. We can't do it alone. Georgia DOT, in fact, cannot sign a multi-year contract. We have to have all the money in the bank to sign a contract, but our State Road and Tollway Authority does not have to have all the money in the bank, so we partner with the CERTA, and because they're the tolling entity anyway in Georgia, so the express lanes, they're responsible for the customer back office, the Peach Pass system, and all that stuff, and then ultimately are the contract holder with the private sector with agreements, and I'll show you in a second how that works with Georgia DOT. But we also have other entities that we partner with, the ATL, which was created about 4 or 5 years ago, that really brings transit together in the region. You have all different transit agencies in Georgia. Some were local, some were regional, some were, MARTA is up there too, but they never talk to each other. So ATL was created to really get those transit entities talking to each other to make sure we're on the same page. And then MARTA itself, who has a heavy rail service line that's operating in Fulton and DeKalb County. So we're bringing those connections with our express lanes to those stations where we can, and it's been a huge success and will be a huge success on 400 and 285. This is that structure I mentioned. Again, CERTA will partner and has signed the contract with the developer through a PA, and then we have series of joint resolutions, state for years, IGAs and MOUs, funding MOUs between us and CERTA so that we can transfer what's needed to make sure that PA is executed, but then we manage, GDOT manages actually the project itself through construction and ultimately any other maintenance and things that happen over the term. So that's how we operate and are able to deliver these projects for the state of Georgia. Now, I put this together recognizing that you probably all are aware of how this works, but you've got the different tools in the toolbox, and as it goes from the public sector delivery and financing all the way up to the private sector delivery and financing, you see where that risk line goes. It goes almost, in the past, certainly exclusively all the way to the developer to own that risk. We've learned a lot of lessons, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes on the panel, on what we've done to change that, because we recognize not all risk is suited for the private sector, and in most cases, really is best for the owner. And we're trying to find those balancing acts to make sure that we do get it in the right place so it is best managed. So what GDOT is very proud to say is we've done a lot to pull back that risk profile back down toward the public sector. So we'll talk about some things that we've done and some innovative approaches and share those with you. But that's really where we're at in Georgia, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Tim. That was a great presentation. Next, I'd like to introduce Paige Heinzman, Director of P3 Delivery from the Tennessee Department of Transportation.
Thank you, Carly. I'm super excited to be here. I've been looking forward to giving this presentation and being part of this panel. It is not new news in the fact that Tennessee is new to the P3 market, but we continue to find comfort and seek advice, words of wisdom, lessons learned from our peer and sister states as we embark on this extremely exciting journey to address critical infrastructure challenges that we're experiencing in Tennessee, along with many other DOTs across the country. And not only that, we're also just seeking to modernize our infrastructure so that it not only meets the needs today, but frankly, more importantly, the needs of the future. So let's get started. We're very new to the market in regards to P3, so we can start from the beginning because it's pretty fresh. I'll start off with saying that Tennessee's P3 program is our Choice Lanes program. We are very intentional with selecting the identifying them as choice lanes. It's because they're just that. Users who use choice lanes make a decision. They make a choice if they want to use the lanes and pay a fee to have a reliable trip time, a reliable travel speed, or they can elect to not use the choice lanes and continue to use the GP lanes that do not have a user fee associated with them. So again, with that, let's start from the beginning. Back in April of 2023, our Governor Bill Lee of Tennessee, enacted into law the Transportation Modernization Act. Fundamentally, that changed everything for the department. But big picture for P3, it gave us the ability, the authority to develop and operate revenue, risk, and availability payment type P3 projects. So that really was step one. In addition to that, the TMA established several other parameters and guide rails for our P3 program, again noting that it gave us the availability to look at availability payment and demand risk scenarios. It also gave us just additional tools when it came to procurement. It spoke to HOV conversion or lack thereof. And then lastly, it did stand up our Transportation Modernization Board, our TMB. Our TMB is responsible and has the authority and the power to approve the development and operation of projects, of choice lane projects in Tennessee. So they have many roles and responsibilities, but a few to name are related to they ultimately have the power to select which projects we have. They're associated with user fees, decisions, as well as vehicle restrictions. So once the TMA was enacted, we got busy in Tennessee, but fortunately we had done our homework, and really that homework started well before the enactment of the TMA. So before that, the department developed what we called our congestion action plans. We also reference those as CAPs, which I'm sure many of us want to add another acronym to our laundry list. We started our first CAP in the Nashville area and the Middle Tennessee area. That really established the framework for us, and we then moved forward with developing CAPs in Chattanooga and Knoxville. Those CAPs reference previously completed studies, but more importantly, they took a very targeted approach to quantifying urban congestion in our major cities within Tennessee, that being Nashville, Chattanooga, and Knoxville. One thing that they brought to light that many of our other studies did not was the fact that we were going to face some extreme funding challenges if we didn't explore other variations of delivering urban congestion projects. So with that, in alignment with the passage of the TMA, we were very quick to identify our first P3 project, that being the I-24 Southeast Choice Lanes project. We're currently in active procurement for that as we speak. There are several reasons that the I-24 corridor bubbled to the top, it surfaced to the top. It is the most congested corridor in Tennessee. We also looked at other things just besides the raw data that resulted from all of our planning efforts. That included the financial viability, the potential NEPA schedule, and just based on feedback with industry and things of that nature. So the I-24 corridor, if you're familiar with Nashville, it starts in the downtown area, just east of downtown, and it goes out of town near Murfreesboro. It's about 26 miles total. There are some improvements and enhancements along I-40 and I-440, but 26 miles total. Overall, the project will include 2 new choice lanes in each direction, in addition to the existing GP lanes that are there, which we currently have 4 in each direction. So in addition to those new lanes, we'll also have enhancements and improvements at various interchanges, some of which will include choice lane accessibility. I mentioned that we're currently in active procurement as we speak, and so in addition to that, we are teeing up our preliminary design, which feeds into the NEPA process. We're drafting our environmental assessment along with our interchange access request. So we've done a lot really in 2.5 years. And so I always like to do a quick recap, especially being new to the market and to showcase what all we've done in such a short amount of time. But again, in April 2023 is when we really got the authority to even entertain P3s. From there, we quickly went to work in the summer of 2023 to engage with industry, to get feedback, to solicit information, and just socialize the idea of P3s in Tennessee. As that was occurring, we continued our planning efforts, which rose to the top was the I-24 project. We then took that project to our Transportation Modernization Board, which they approved as our first P3 project. From there, we had a pre-let industry event in the fall of last year, and then very quickly released a request for qualifications. I think it was released my first week on the job, so it's been pretty exciting since I've been in this role. So that was issued in November of 2024. We shortlisted earlier this year based on the recipients or based on the statements of qualifications we received, and then we issued a draft RFP in April of this year. So we're currently in active procurement and looking forward to commercial close in about a year. So we've done all that over the last 2.5 years with a pretty lean crew. I do like to just quickly reference our team. I think many of you likely know Brian Ledford. He's with us in spirit. His daughter had a baby yesterday, so he is enjoying all the cuddles of being a grandfather. So Brian is still our fearless leader over our Major Projects Bureau here with the Tennessee Department of Transportation. Under his leadership, we also have Daniel Leeson, who is our Innovative Financial Director, myself in the P3 Director role, and then we're looking to find a really strong leader to be at the forefront of our Major Projects group. So beyond that, we also have supporting staff, but in addition to that, I would be remiss if I didn't note the fact that we heavily lean on our external partners. They are critical to what we've done to date, and quite frankly, they're critical to the success we look forward to in the future. So looking forward to a little bit of Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Paige. A lot of exciting things happening in Tennessee. And make sure and tell Brian we all said congratulations on the grandbaby. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Sean Wilson, Senior Vice President at WSP and the former Secretary of the Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development.
All right, thank you, Carly. So they invited me to come up because I don't have a project to pitch. I'm like most of you out on that side, but I do have the experience of having been secretary, and I'd like to apologize to my panel because my wife made me wear a tie today. She said, you invested in all those ties and you don't wear them anymore, so you're going to travel one day with them. So she stuck a tie, and I have to take a picture to send to her. So my job is to help bridge the gap or connect us to the conversation of about risk and balancing that act from the state's perspective. There is life after working in a DOT, and I could, as my friend Pete or Patrick from Missouri to come up and give this presentation and talk about life after, but that's not what you're here to talk about. I'm going to talk a little bit about my background and how it applied to managing the risks. And when you think about public-private partnerships, these are the 4 areas I think that summarize the risks that are associated, not just for the state agency or the government that's hosting or doing the procurement, but also for our industry. There's a political risk out there. There's risk to the planning process. Of course, there's public administration and public policy. All of that represents my background in many respects, but putting it into practice is the challenge. Actually applying the lessons learned and the best practices and experiences that you've had is what makes this unique. So what are some of these risk-related challenges here? And I've got images of the 2 projects that were successfully procured during my tenure at the Department of Transportation or transitioned to my successor, which in and of itself, time is a risk because in the public sector, we operate in 4-year terms or in 8-year terms if you're lucky, and 12-year terms if you Pete and Ron, you get punished for going much longer. But more importantly, these projects live beyond those scopes. And as developers, as proposers, you're looking at that timeline, you're looking at that clock to make sure you have consistency. So first and foremost, I will tell you, gaining public support to do what's necessary in a time frame is huge. And so to have the states moving forward that you see today, it's absolutely phenomenal to see everything happening in the southeast part of the country and other parts of the country as well. When I started as secretary, this wasn't a popular conversation back then. There wasn't the effort to really build on the momentum of either IIJA or mega project delivery. And so gaining the public support was a huge lift for us as a state, understanding that there's inherent reputational risk to doing these kinds of projects. Someone said earlier at the NC Go launch that, you have an option when it comes to P3 projects. You typically have an alternate route. You don't have that with everything, but the public doesn't like to pay for very much when it comes to getting quality infrastructure. Everybody wants a construction zone, but not everybody wants to pay for it. Likewise, you have to build an internal awareness of what this process is. This is a lot different. This is a hell of a lot different than design, bid, build type of delivery. So there's a career risk to that DOT or to that leader for changing the way you procure projects and the way you do things differently. I will tell you, if you look at any state that has a program, P3s are going to represent perhaps 1% of the projects that are going to go out the door, but are probably representing 50 to 60% of the public opinion because those projects are so critical. And having your agency, 4,000, 5,000, 10,000 people strong in some cases that have been in this business for 20 or 30 years doing it one way is a huge challenge to be bought in and accepted by the respective agencies. And then third, getting the public sector to buy in and trust that government is hard. Many of you represent entities that are looking to do business with my colleagues on the stage here and others that are in this P3 space. In order for you to make the kinds of investment decisions that you have to make, you have to have trust. You have to build a meaningful relationship and expect that to deliver. And that means managing that risk. There is a risk in this market, naturally. That's what happens in business. But you're going above and beyond by engaging in the public sector, trying to deliver public infrastructure using a private sector business model. And those are huge factors that departments of transportation may not always appreciate. Why? Because every year our budget shows up. Every year we know we're going to have a certain number of people. Every year we know what the routine work is going to be. That does not absolutely happen on every P3 project. And last but not least, it's important for the private sector to dedicate the time that's necessary for these type of deliveries takes away from the leadership's ability to do what's normal. Those other 99% of the projects that people care about, that the legislators have promised, all of those things suffer as a result of putting the time and effort into these type of deliveries. And every one of these offices, I think, have demonstrated a very lean structure to be able to deliver magnificent projects, huge investments in each of those states. But even the manpower and the womanpower that they have represent a very small part of what an agency's efforts are going to be. And so there is a risk and a reward. How do you balance doing that. If you're Joey, how do you balance what he has to do here in North Carolina for every other project in every other region, particularly on the hills of recovery? When you think about everything that we saw in those opening sessions about disaster and the impact, but on the other hand, turn around and deliver all of these types of projects, that's a huge task to balance that, and it's important for us to understand that as the private sector. So when I look at this and think about the lessons learned for an agency, when you think about risk, when you think about P3 delivery, DOTs have to be bought into trading in the old way of doing business for a new way of thinking in every aspect of the delivery model. And that means taking on more responsibility for things that we have inherently pushed out to the private sector and said, put it in the bid. It's much more effective for us to balance that risk, to take risks that are appropriate for a state, and then push those risks that are appropriate for the private sector to manage and better manage those risks. Balancing, relying on industry input is absolutely phenomenal. It is encouraging to see so many people in this room and at this conference, in part because of the I-77 job that was yesterday, which was brilliant, to have that integrated in the overall conference. But the conversation that has to happen between the private sector as well as the public sector is important. And it happens in one-on-ones, it happens in informal and formal engagement. That is absolutely essential to balancing the risk. Because remember, this isn't owning it all and it's not giving it all away, it's balancing that. And the way you balance that is have communication. And then it's a risk, so be prepared to pivot because not all P3s will work. We had 2 successful P3s, but I also had 2 that did not work in Louisiana, in part because of the politics, in part because of the industry's response to where we were, and in part because the department may not have been at the point of procuring it because it wasn't ready. You can't take something out of the oven and expect it to be a beautiful cake if it hasn't been fully baked. And so understand that in this P3 process that you may have to pivot and do some things differently, which means going back to the drawing board for traditional design bid build, going back to look at finance. And that's a risk to the industry. One of the biggest fears we always had was destroying the reputational ability to deliver a public-private partnership given the authority that the legislature had. And then the 4th lesson learned is delivering a project knowing that others will not always be as ethical, as honest, or as straightforward as you have to remain when you're in the public sector. Recognizing that misinformation, disinformation, weaponization of a project or your character assassinations is a part of it, and you need to support and encourage every public official that's doing this. Because at the end of the day, they're putting their life's work and their career and their reputation on a model that's entrusting so much more to the private sector. So very quickly, a couple of insights I'd like to share. Long-term implications of delivering using this P3 model, I find, are appropriate risk allocation. And remember, I said this isn't owning all of it, and it's not taking all of it. It's an appropriate share. Building better maintenance into a project is huge as a part of managing an organization's reputational risk. Because the P3s that we've delivered will be the best maintained assets in our state, in part because they're layered with a business model that warrants charging a particular toll or a rate. And then you have untapped innovation. Governments have historically moved slow. This is an opportunity to do things differently, more efficiently, more affordably, maybe even safer, something with a little bit more resilience that you don't have to sacrifice as a private sector, as a public sector entity. And then time really is money. For my public sector friends to be able to make the appropriate decisions within a confined amount of time, I think is absolutely essential because the longer these take, the more risk that you're exposing the private sector to, as well as the public sector. So traditional delivery may be more expensive sometimes when you have projects that fit this model, that it might be more affordable in the long run to get it done when you factor the time value of money. And then last but not least, there are unknown benefits. What's doable can ignite your workforce to achieve things that we've never seen when they choose the most difficult projects to deliver and are successful. You can create huge economic opportunity, not just for investors, but for individuals who are in that subcategory or in that local market supporting these entities. And then last but not least, it helps you think about what is possible. What if we funded all of the infrastructure needs? What if we built all of the difficult projects that have waited on the books for 20 and 30 years? This is the model and the approach to do it, and it starts and ends with balancing that allocation of risk. And so with that, I think I am prepared to sit down and engage in some discussion and talk about those war stories and horror stories.
Thank you, Sean. Can you all hear me? All right, so now we're gonna switch over to our panel portion of the session. So I'm gonna ask a few questions, and then like I said, towards the end of the session, I will open it up for you all to ask questions of our panelists. So first, I'm gonna start off with a few questions for all of the panelists. So to kick us off, Commissioner Britch, I'll start with you. You had mentioned 20 billion in P3 projects delivered in Virginia. How does your agency define a balanced P3 risk sharing model, and how has that definition evolved with experience?
That's a big question. So I think as we progress, as I said, we've got 30 years of experience in delivering P3s and a lot of lessons learned. I think the biggest part of this is looking at the P3 model from a partnership basis and the recognition that, and each of the panelists have already touched on it, that it is a long-term partnership that's associated with a concession deal. It is just not signing the deal, getting the project constructed, and turning the light switch on for service commencement and everything runs smoothly. It truly is a partnership from day one, even before the first set of plans are developed. And it's about looking forward. Some of our concessions, the longest ones that we have, are 87 years. We're now down to 69 on that particular one, but that is a long-term partnership that has to be there. And it's about that balancing of risk at the early state, from the construction state all the way through the operations, and recognizing that there's the customer service end of this that really takes shape. That when the customers are unhappy, they're going to go to the political, the local elected or the elected officials, and that comes back as to why did we sign a deal, what were the contents of the deal, and making sure that that partnership, when we signed the deal originally, there's transparency in it. So I'd say there's some art to doing this, but our biggest part of what we look at is the partnership that we're going to get, making sure that any deal that we do at this point is transparent from day one, all the way through to service commencement and beyond. And that really builds the trust, not only with the private sector marketplace, but also with the elected officials, to be able to ensure that the DOT is operating in the best interest, in this case, in the Commonwealth.
Thank you. Yeah, North Carolina, we certainly agree on the transparency front, as that was a lesson learned for us on I-77 North, but also we can't focus on the customer enough, those end users that are ultimately going to be using our facilities. Tim, I'm going to ask you the same question. So you said 10 different P3s. So through your experience, how has the definition of a balanced P3 risk sharing model evolved in that time?
It's involved tremendously. We went from not wanting to share any risk, we wanted it all thrown to the private side, to recognizing we were going to get nowhere fast. And we started really listening to the future partner that we could have on these projects, and really what their concerns were, and understand what the risk is. And then ultimately, like I said earlier, who is best to manage that risk? And it's one thing to say, yeah, it's probably best for the state to manage or share. It's another thing to actually do it. That was how we evolved. We actually did it. We pulled back a lot of risk to the department as a whole, 100%, and then we looked for ways to balance that risk that made sense for both the private side and the public side. Ultimately, what we're trying to achieve is a project that delivers what we promised to the customers, right? We want a customer service experience that's great. We want reliability in our most congested corridors, and we offer that choice for them to use this facility to get that service. So moving the needle on that risk profile, which we did on 400 and continuing to do, really helps us get that highest and most value to deliver what we promised to the citizens of Georgia.
Thank you, Tim. And Paige, you all have a lot of exciting things happening in Tennessee, new to the market. As you're, looking at your first project, how would you and TDOT define a balanced P3 risk sharing model?
Yeah, so I would say the department's philosophy really centers around the fact that, risk allocation should be a reflection of each party's ability to influence and manage each risk. And so that's really the approach that we're going forward with. I would say we're also continuing to look at what's market precedents, and some of that continues to be engagement with our peer and sister states to have a better understanding and also to ensure that we have a strong stance there.
All right, thank you. And Sean, you've got a lot of great experience both on the public and private side. As you look at P3s, based on your experience, how would you define a balanced P3 risk sharing model?
So I'll reflect on what we did in Louisiana. The two projects had two different risk profiles because of the nature of the project and where we found ourselves. And so for us, we're thinking about can this project be delivered using a traditional model? And if so, are we best suited to manage those risks and that exposure or that delivery? And in both cases, we opted to go in terms of the public-private partnership piece and shared risk appropriately. On some projects, we had no experience doing some things that were very rare and very unique and very complex. And that happened in both. One was decommissioning a tunnel. The other had to do with working with a large number of utilities, including two Class 1 railroads, as well as a contamination issue. And there was just a lot of exposure to messing it up and not getting it right from the public side. But there was a better chance of introducing innovation and overcoming some of the hurdles that we would have had if we maintained it ourselves. The other piece of balancing that risk, I think, has to do with our ability to finance some of these things. And so we had to have a different level of risk appetite based on the scale and the scope of the project. The two projects that are really large for Louisiana, one's $2.4 billion under construction, another one's going to probably be about $3 billion. When you add those two projects together, that represented as much money as we were able to contract out on everything else my entire 7.5 years as being secretary. And so as a result, if we want to deliver those projects, we have to be a little bit more tolerant of taking some of that risk and realizing that not delivering it is not an alternative. And so in summary, I would tell you, we looked at the project, we looked at our capacity to build it or deliver it, and we looked at the nature of what else we could do in lieu of using a P3 and managing that risk. And it was one that, as secretary, I found myself making decisions and being in the room on a weekly basis to ensure that we honored the time commitment to the process, but that we also made the kinds of decisions that most of our employees aren't used to having to make when it comes to risk. They just assume the state will own 100% of it, and so they make those kinds of decisions. And so we were able to balance it that way.
Thank you. Next, I'll ask you, Tim. I know you had mentioned a bunch of different projects, those 10 different projects that you have, and now you've got one in Savannah as well. Knowing every project is unique, what would you say are the top 2 or 3 risks you prioritize when you're structuring a new P3 project?
Obviously, there's a lot of risk, and we talked about them already: public risk, political risk, and so on. But what we try to do is to try to manage risk up front to the extent we can. And the 3 that stand out to me really obviously is NEPA, and that's through public engagement. And then there's utility risk, and then there's a right-of-way risk. When we started State Route 400 AP deal, we were like, developer can handle all the right-of-way stuff. We don't need to worry about. We'll buy a few properties, but they can handle 100% risk of that. Quickly, in the second deal, taking 100% right-of-way risk, even their proposed parcels for their change in design or final design, we took the approach that, hey, we are better suited to manage that risk. And also utility risk. There's several major utilities that ran across 400, Colonial Pipeline, a major power transmissions. We actually spent $20 million up front to relocate Colonial Pipeline. That's a huge risk to a project of that nature. Finance costs, delays, et cetera, that we knew was best for us to go ahead and get that out of the way. So we look at ways to manage that up front, but all the public outreach that we did for the major mobility investment program as a whole, but in particular the express lanes, I've said this in panels before. The hardest part to do for these projects is to convince people there's a problem that you're trying to solve. We were actually able to do that. People recognize there's a problem, and we've tried and tried for 50 more or plus years to widen our way out of these problems, and it never happened. So we've proven through that NEPA and public engagement process that we've got the right solution here that offers that choice. They're not forcing you into anything. You don't have to pay anything, but it also, adding these managed lanes, frees up capacity in general purpose lanes. So taking all that together really, it looks at risk from that perspective and try to tackle it up front where you can. If you save it to the very end or push it into the deal itself, you're not gonna get the best value for the state.
Thank you, Tim. And Commissioner Birch, I know Tim had mentioned, particularly NEPA right of way. Would you say in the state of Virginia, as you're looking at P3s, are those a couple of the key risks you're looking at? Are there others that you wanted to mention?
Those are absolutely the key risk. So with the 30 years, we learned very quickly coming off of the 460 project that I mentioned. It's now P3 101, I think, that NEPA has to be done. NEPA has to be done before you even get to the table, because then you know what the risks are from the start, and it would be unfair to start a project in a P3 space without NEPA. Right away, Tim, I think it's hazmat, utilities, and I think those are the big ones there. In listening to Tim talk, and I said this, each deal is different and each set of risks are different. And I'm running through a couple of the ones that I've negotiated. We've had right-of-way issues that said, no, we're fine, that anything in addition to right-of-way is on the concessionaire. I've done another one where we say that we're a little lukewarm on this. We'll go ahead and assume the first 10 million in right-of-way. You assume the next, and then we've got 50-50 share above that. ITS is the same way, that if we see something from an ITS standard that may change over the course of we're developing a project that's 3 or 4 years, things change by the time we get to the ITS components that we're willing to go into. The first part being negotiating something on risk that would be, it's a 50-50 share for the first 5 million, and then something like that. So it all morphs, and it really takes that when you go through the proprietary meetings and the balance of the risk, to have those honest and upfront conversations and peel apart each one of those risks. I keep hearing about risk profile, and universally we're talking nebulous until you get right into the deal itself, and then you peel that onion apart down to the nth degree and say, where do I have it? We are better suited for some things on the environmental and the government approvals that exist today, but there are, on the ingenuity side and innovation side, I think the risk can be taken by the contractor in the delivery, and then you can balance it out from the public sector. So that's how we approach it.
All right, thank you. And Paige, I know you've heard a lot of different risks being discussed from our peer states in Virginia and Georgia. As you're working on your first P3, are there particular risks that you all are looking at in Tennessee?
Yeah, I'll just add the usual suspect to the third parties, that being railroad. I don't know if I've heard that one quite yet, but that one in there too. And I would say it's it is some of the usual suspects, and so we do try to leverage the work that we've done on the traditional side, and that helps with the risk allocation and the profiling in particular, to allow us to inform the decision on which risk we're willing to take and which one we're wanting to push to the private side.
All right. And Sean, from your perspective as former secretary, what governance or policy structures help states remain disciplined in managing risks over the project's full life cycle? Not just in procurement, but, end users using a facility. What are some of those?
So just to add a little piece, I heard Tim talk a little bit about mitigating some of those risks up front, recognize how difficult that might be for some states to be able to explain to folks why this is going to help you get a better deal. Why does this help mitigate and manage cost or change orders or factors into the final proposal that you get by addressing right away or utilities and owning that? So that's a huge point you made there, Tim. In terms of, I think what will help is complete transparency once you are at the point of being able to be honest with the public and to reveal the full merit and the content of a comprehensive agreement. And in that, building a infrastructure system, and this is something that time did not afford me the opportunity to do as secretary, but we planted as many seeds as we can and continue to fertilize that until that is to help them build a framework to manage and monitor a contract once it's operating. Because the individuals who are there today aren't probably going to be the individuals that are going to be there in 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years when you get ready to have a hand back. So building in a system of maintenance of that project, consistent, when I say maintenance of that contract, I should say, consistent with what the comprehensive agreement calls for, I think is absolutely fundamental to getting it right and maintaining public confidence in what you've been able to do. We're seeing in some places now, Louisiana is one example where you have new leadership will come in and they have to really get trained up and read up onto what the project agreements really were. And then you have an opportunity at the early stages to see nuance and tinkering with that contract or tinkering with that delivery. And I think that poses a risk because the public is expecting any state or any agency to honor those agreements that were made initially, whether they liked them or not, and recognize that the opposition will remain opposition for some time. But it's the majority, that silent majority, that has to feel like you're honoring your commitment. And that's the beauty of a contract. That's a lot different than having a legislature set rates or reduce rates, as was the case with the Crescent City Connection 3 times, without managing expectations. And so transparency, having a framework to honor and manage the contract, not just to protect the state, but also to protect the comprehensive team, the developer team that is doing the work.
Yeah, and Commissioner Bridge, I saw you nodding your head in agreement. Based on Virginia's long track record with P3s, what are some key lessons learned in Virginia about balancing that public risk exposure while still, having the ability to attract strong private partners?
Well, I agree with Sean completely and what he said. And I said this already. It's the partnership. It's the ability to be transparent in the nature of the deal and making sure that we're articulating it. It is the trust factor, and I think Sean, you said this in your presentation. It is gaining the trust of the concessionaire team at the early stage, that you're listening to them throughout, and it really starts at the time that you issue the RFP and you start the proprietary meetings, sitting at the table, showing that you're listening, showing that you're taking away things, and when you come back to the table, that from the state's perspective, maybe we gave on something, maybe we didn't, maybe there's some lesson learned, but it really boils down to trust on the concessionaire's part and the owner's part. And I'll just tell you right now that most owners aren't trustworthy of contractors and vice versa. So getting to that table and having those open conversations is going to be imperative. But you build the transparency in the framework of your P3 legislation so that as I said, 50 to 87-year concessions, you have a lot of turnover, both with staff, with elected officials, with governors. And I've got a one-term governor, so we're always looking at how do I articulate this to the next governor and recognize that P3s or infrastructure projects take time, build up a lot of time to be able to get to that point. But it's that trust that you build through your P3 legislation that as you sign that comprehensive agreement and you go into service commencement and someone does not like the toll structure, you're going to get legislation to be able to reduce tolls or cap tolls or something to that effect. It is having a solid transparency in the comprehensive agreement, understanding and being able to articulate what dynamic pricing is, how it works, why it's there, manage lanes, and always having the free option. So even if you go to $50 for that section, there's a free option. And being able to articulate that helps build the trust with the legislator too. That this is a full, well-rounded, that we've got some facilities that have been in place for coming up on 20 years, and we're able to stand at the podium and say why we signed a deal, and I'll just say that what's the right word? We we strongly oppose what a legislative action is going to do because it harms not only the concessionaire but it harms the P3 space. So we've been able to work with our legislature, our governor's office over the last several years to be able to stand up at the podium and take a strongly opposed position. And so far, we've stood the test of time. And why? I sound like a broken record at this point. It's because of the transparency that we put into it at a very early stage as to what this means. And I do think that the managed lane concept really hopes or helps sell the position from the state that there's always a free option. Anyone, you're not being forced to pay that. It's not a dedicated toll facility. You have a free option if you choose to do it, and that toll pricing is there if you need to use it. And so it's truly, this truly is a balance between owners, partners in the legislature, and the public.
Good perspective. Thank you. Tim, I want to switch over and talk to you a little bit about SR 400. So obviously, it's one of Georgia's most high profile P3 undertakings. What were some of the key risk allocations decisions that GDOT had to make on SR 400? And then did those influence your approach to market engagement and contracting structuring?
Yeah, yes, we made a lot of movement on risk allocation on State Route 400. Some things that's never been done in the market before, quite honestly, from an environmental risk perspective. We got a lot of innovative, very, very innovative ATCs that really increase the risk profile from a reevaluation perspective, ultimately saying, would this may turn into an amendment versus a reevaluation? And the value that came out of those were so great and better for the project that we felt like maybe we should share in that risk down the line. So that was one of the biggest one, really a large, and we take the ATCs and say, we're standing behind our approval of this ATC versus before all ATCs are on the developer, 100% risk. We took the risk on, not 100%, but we took a lot of the risk on that NEPA side of things, which we traditionally never did. So that moved the needle when it came to that partnership, allowing developers to feel comfortable bringing that value in the project versus, well, maybe this is not worth my risk. I'm not going to add it to the project. So we gained a lot of value in 400, stuff we've never done before. You know, we did early works in 400, allowed a developer to get started before everything was ready to go from a construction perspective. Right away, I talked about performance security. We were having high levels of performance security on these projects. We're like, why do we need such high amounts of performance security? So we reduced that quite a bit. And then we talked about hazardous materials and then payment for work product. We really looked at and listened to the industry because this takes a lot to put these deals together and propose on these projects. And if you want to get the best proposal by all teams, you really got to show that you want that from them and pay them for it. We often had very low payment for work products to the losing teams, and recognize that these projects are different. P3s are different. How can we help keep folks interested and give us that best result and increase significantly payment for work product so that we could get that best proposal that we were looking for? And that approach to industry engagement took a complete turn. We started off on the AP deal at the table across from the developer like this. It was like they were talking to walls. I remember Steve DeWitt some of it was during COVID on the phone. I bet he's thinking, these guys aren't listening to a word I'm saying. So we really, on the second round, said, wait a minute, we give disclaimers in these one-on-ones and these engagements. Why aren't we really having true dialogue? And that really opened the door to understand what this risk is and help us understand, again, like I said earlier, who's best to manage it. And we went a long way. And if you don't act on that and really understand and move the needle, it's all going to be for naught. So engagement and lots of engagement. And if you can start with, out of the gate, your first draft of the RFP with a balanced commercial approach, it's easier to massage either way than it is to go from extreme all the way back the other way. So that's what we did on 400.
Thank you for that overview. In Paige, you gave us a brief overview of your P3 team. As you're working on your first P3, how do you build internal capacity and institutional knowledge to manage risk effectively as your P3 program, your pipeline matures?
So TDOT has a true matrix organization, and we are currently really stretching it thin in regards to the project team associated with the I-24 project in particular. So we have a dedicated team of internal TDOT SMEs that focus on the project, but quite frankly, they have many other roles and responsibilities in an effort to deliver our program outside of the P3 project itself. We have in our engineering leadership, we have trusted advisors, and then we have a very small core group of P3 that I referenced during my presentation. So leveraging that, and then associated with that, and kind of tied to the collection of risk. You know, early on I-24, we spent a lot of time collecting data. So it was a heavy quantification exercise for us to understand the risk, the magnitude of those risks, how to allocate them, and that, you know, fed into our internal risk register, which we incorporate into almost all our conversations with our project team. I think a big piece of risk for internally within the department and within state government is that we're risk adverse, right? And we're also, many of us are engineers, so like double whammy. So just talking about risk in light of them not being not having a negative connotation tied to them, so they're constantly at the forefront of our minds. So it's not something that we're running away from, we're actually running towards and having open conversations about them.
Thank you, Paige. Sean, so looking back with your experience on the public side, were there moments where you felt like the state accepted too much or too little risk? And what would you advise other states or local planning organizations as you're looking at a P3? What would you advise them to look out for?
So that's a trick question. Too much. I would say I don't think we ever took on too much risk, but it was the scale and scope of the risk as we understood it. Because when you think about the environmental issues or the hazmat issues, we could not put our heads around what the cost would be for the most catastrophic potential impact there was. But what we could do was say, you know what? Is it really fair to ask the private sector to own that if they're putting up the vast majority of the resources of this $2.4 billion project? And the answer was no. So I don't think we ever took on too much risk. I would have much rather have prevented that occurrence or incident from occurring, and maybe the state could have done more in that aspect. So I don't think that we could ever take on too much risk, or that we did. I mean, there's a way you can do it, but I don't think we did. I think that's the one that stands out the most for me. That was the hardest to go to bed that night, is saying, "Yep, we're going to do it." But it was also necessary to get the project to the next level. And so I would go back to that. Can we get this project built or not? Because it had been waiting for 25 years. And that was the one issue that we failed to take action on because we just didn't know what that action was. And so, but I resolved and accepted that it was the right decision because the project is moving forward. And like Paige just said, we can talk ourselves out of a project very easily because we can get all the engineers and the lawyers in the room and the opposition to the P3 concept, and they'll figure out a way to kill a project pretty darn easily. And so in terms of my advice, I would say, you know, the executives and those who are most intimately connected to a project, you've got to really be thoughtful and focused on the end result, because there's so much that occurs every step along the way, whether it's around the financial close, if you're using TIFIA or other federally supported financing tools, there's hurdles you have to go through. At the end of the day, it's still most important to get that project done. Otherwise, you will not have enough resources at the state level to do it all yourself. And so, you know, reiterating the idea about transparency, the concept of real partnership and engagement to resolve problems that crop up, because problems do occur on projects, is absolutely essential. And I will tell every executive, if you leave your agency to the wiles and wishes of your staff, you're setting yourself up for failure. There's a reason why there's a CEO or a commissioner or a secretary, and that's to make the hard decisions and to make those strategic decisions that will direct a project one way or another. And when you have staff start to understand that your job is to implement, my job is to perhaps make the tough decision, and when I make that decision, that's the one we put our heads down and we go deliver. leadership is absolutely essential in making these projects work. If and this isn't about Sean, but for the projects that I was involved with, if it wasn't for the bully pulpit that you get as secretary sometimes, and it cuts both ways. There are folks from the industry that would tell you they didn't like the answer they got in some of those one-on-ones. I'm gonna pick on Steve. Steve was one of them probably. But at the end of the day, we had more conversations to understand we did the most that we could do, and that was all we could do. And so leadership matters in these projects much more than I think we get caught up in the requirements and the language, but the decision making process, how you communicate that, and not just to the secretary, but to the governor or to whoever that chair is of your commission or authority. You have to have leadership appropriately engaged for the role that they play, and you are pivotal as that agency leader.
Thank you, Sean. That was great advice. Next, I want to turn it to you all to ask some questions if you have any. If you do, please just raise your hand and we will bring a mic to you up here at the front. If you,
Anybody but Steve.
we got a mic.
Anybody but Steve.
Yeah. And just introduce yourself.
All right. Good afternoon. You got it. Okay. I don't want to take it. I'm Drew Marsh, Office of General Counsel, North Carolina DOT. Dr. Nelson, I'm going to target you anyway because we know mutual friends. The question is really for all of you. Do you have or take advice in managing these risks from your underwriting team for bonds, or do you consider your bond rating at all in managing these risks, and how does that play out?
Very, very quickly, I will say yes, and this is a shout out and an appreciation to all of our private sector partners that are advising my colleagues up here, whether it's the financial advisor, the legal advisor, or their technical advisor. You listen to them all appropriately, but it goes back to making that tough decision. I made decisions based on what we could do based on the information that we got from the developers and each of those teams. Meaning, don't always assume that your technical is going to be aligned with your legal, that's going to be aligned with the financial. And so while we would have one-on-ones as one team, I would then have one-on-ones with each of them, and then with my staff to understand what's the impact of what we're hearing in this decision. And so we absolutely factored all of those things in that decision-making process, but the decisions I made were unique to me and may not be replicated by any other decision maker in any other project because they're so unique. Once you've seen one P3, you've seen one P3.
And looking to the other panelists, anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, I think Sean hit on it. You have to talk to all sides. We're often labeled a three-legged stool in Georgia, legal, technical, and financial. And when we started 400, the AP deal, we weren't talking to each other, and it was going nowhere fast. So we recognized we had to, all of us, meet all the time in every meeting and not exclude anybody so we can have these conversations. And yeah, we may not all agree, and it may be the best interest on the technical side to move forward with something that they may not agree with, but ultimately, to move the project forward, you got to make those tough decisions, like Sean said.
Any other questions in the audience?
I'm Steve DeWitt. A question for really Dr. Wilson, but I'm sure that with any of you. As Calcasieu came to a close, there was a lot of political risk there. It weathered that because the DOT stepped in and actually became an equity partner in that project. That's unique. I think it's worth sharing that story a little bit. And maybe I turn to Commissioner Britch in Virginia. Is that something you would ever contemplate? Because it's different. There's pros and cons to that, but I'll leave you with that.
So I will trust that you won't quote me on this, but when we put up every dollar that we could, I think it came to about $850 million. The project eventually closed at $2.4 billion, and there was this little thing called the governor's race that occurred. Not only did I leave the department, but I happened to be the guy running against the guy who won. I didn't lose, I just didn't win. I like to say it that way. And so we had a really good relationship with Governor Landry prior to, I don't think we have a bad relationship now, but I'll let him answer that question. Recognize that when parties change or leadership changes, I think someone said everything goes out the window whether it's good, bad, or ugly, and they try to start from scratch. And so we went from a project point where we were losing the political clout and the ability to go forward, not because of merit, but because of politics. And so the new governor comes in. My governor, who I served, went out, and there was only one thing he asked for or communicated with is, do not let this project die if you can, because this is the only way this project is going to be delivered. That was the only piece of advice he gave. And he took it. And in order to give this project a new look, I think they had to come in to make some concessions, and the agency, the state, compromised and became an equity partner in the process by putting money up to be able to lower some of those risks and exposures. Now, I don't want to get into the details of whether or not it really paid off in terms of the toll rates. I think that's a part of it, but the idea that they are an equity partner in the project is something that we contemplated but ruled out as something we just could not afford to do, because we were in a position to maintain resources and support other projects. And so I thought it was a pretty innovative way to keep a project alive, is to demonstrate it's different than what the previous guy did. And so at the end of the day, I put myself back in the position of being secretary, saying it's more important to deliver this project for this community than not. And if a matter of a couple of $100 million that we prioritize for another project that might not go was at stake, then good for this community that it got done. And so, you know, it's a very unique perspective. I'm not sure if that's going to be the way of the future, because if we could afford to do that, we probably wouldn't be in the P3 space. But again, the project got done at the end of the day, and I think it was the financial deal of the year and some other really neat accolades, and I applaud the state and the new administration for following through, making it happen.
And it looks like we had one more question over here.
Keith Gary, NCDOT. So I know, Tim, in Georgia, Georgia DOT alternative delivery projects are classified as public interest determination, or PID, which under that classification allows them to be reimbursed for relocations. Are projects in your P3 program also considered PID? And then I guess to the rest of the panelists, do your programs have option or legislation where utilities can be relocated for your P3 project to help, as long as they maintain schedule, which helps to preserve or manage the risk?
Answer is yes. All design, build, and P3 projects are automatically PID. Public interest determination just allows us to add utilities if the utility owner will let us to the contract, so the developer can make that utility adjustment, or reimburse them for that cost, even if they don't have prior rights. So it's the legislation that we got some years ago, was known as Senate Bill 19 back in the day, that really allowed us to manage utility risk from that perspective, because often you're in fights forever on prior rights and the notion that they want to get paid for it. So it really, for these projects that have to go fast, it really helps us manage that schedule and that utility risk through that mechanism.
Yep. And with the couple minutes that we have, just want to check with the other panelists, anything that you all would like to add before we wrap.
Nailed it.
I was going to say, if you're thinking about establishing a P3 program, from scratch, if you're a representative of a DOT or you work for a DOT that is seeking that, I would say get your legislation right, get your stakeholders teed up really early on, and engage in a champion at the highest level. That would be my advice.
Well, thank you all. This was valuable insights that you all gave from your experience in different states, and I'd like to give you all a hand. Thank you very much. And next, I'll turn it back over to our board member, Mike Fox.
Thank you, Carly. And I'm going to be brief since I'm the only thing remaining between caffeine and snacks for you. So I really do think this is a great discussion today. We're so fortunate to have the expertise from our neighboring states. And Louis is a little farther away, but we still call you a neighbor. You're in the South. And Carly did a great job. You can tell when she asks questions, she used to be a reporter. So I hope y'all didn't feel grilled. But thank you all for your interest in this topic. We're excited about it in North Carolina. And with this, we're adjourned. Thank you.